Okay. So again, just thank you so much for joining me today. And I just want to get started right off with the interview by asking you, what does it mean to be a curator with your passion for fashion and everything from your studies? What does that actually mean for you with this role?
So I think that different curators kind of approach it differently. For me, it's really about telling stories and creating narratives from objects.
Mhm.
It always comes back to the objects, material culture that we've been able to preserve in our collection and other collections, and using that to really create a connection to the past or the present. We show a lot of contemporary pieces too, but really using that object to tell a larger story. And that story revolves around fashion, but through fashion, we tell so many stories about history and gender and identity and sociology, economic. The list is endless. But for me, it's really telling stories through objects.
Wow. And for you as a curator, what would be your day-to-day duties and activities for your role?
So I spend some time in our collection with our objects, not as much as I would like. So that's kind of the most, I think, kind of curator type thing that I do, but I do a lot of writing.
Mhm.
Um, at the
Okay.
museum at FIT, we serve the FIT students. So I work with graduate students who are learning about curatorialship and fashion, and then we also have study classes and researchers come in, so I interact with them. So the day-to-day kind of changes. We're definitely working on exhibitions and books, but we're also really focused on our students.
Okay. And just kind of diving into who you are personally and your love of history and fashion, what was that, or what is that emotional connection that you have to fashion? When did you realize that you were in love with design and fashion in general? Was that when you were a little girl or became a teenager? Can you just kind of delve into that?
I think I first became interested in, I don't remember when I first became interested in fashion, but I asked my
Mhm.
mom for a subscription to Vogue when I was about maybe 11 or 12.
Oh, wow.
And for over 20 years, I read Vogue cover to cover every month. It was like, the highlight of kind of my month, having that magazine come in and those images. And, so I was really taken by, the everyday elegance of the fashion I saw, but
Mm,
also these kind of fantastical, kind of, over the top pieces that I also saw. And
yes.
bringing those images together was really exciting for me. And in the early 2000s, there was some really interesting stuff going on in fashion. It's a very loaded topic, but I'm Black and I'm Chinese, and I did start to see kind of like cultural engagement, looking at different parts of the world through fashion, perhaps
Mhm.
not in ways that we can do it perhaps a little bit in more sophisticated, more inclusive ways today. But I really was captivated with like kind of different views of the world that were being portrayed in fashion at that time.
Just to kind of piggyback on what you said about, you getting the subscription to Vogue, and that was kind of like your foray into the fashion world. I still remember as a little girl watching, the old 60s, like the Bible epics and some of those historical dramas. And for me, as a little kid, I really didn't put two and two together. I didn't know really what that was, but I just felt like, why aren't people dressing like this? I mean, I just thought it was just so wonderful. And
Mhm.
like you said, that just that fantastical world, that just over the topness and that the maximalist of it all, maximalism. And I just, for me, that's how the connection started. Just seeing just a wonderful costume, especially I think the very first costume designer who I ever found out about was Edith Head. I
Mhm.
still remember learning about her and her background and how she was the costume designer for so many wonderful old Hollywood movies. And for me, that was my first kind of foray into that whole world. So I totally understand with Vogue and seeing all those wonderful editorials. Like I get that. So and just now going into your specific area of Miss Ann Lowe, can you just describe your research into her life in general?
Absolutely. I first came across Ann Lowe, I went to graduate school, I learned costume history, but she wasn't in my curriculum. I came
Mhm.
across her. I got an internship with the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. This
Mhm.
was before the building opened. So this was in 2012. So we worked in office space as the museum was actually being built. But my project was to research the Black Fashion Museum collection, which is a wonderful museum that was started in the 70s by Lois K. Alexander in New York. And the collection is now with the Smithsonian. And so it was through that research that I came across Ann Lowe and another dressmaker named Elizabeth Keckley. And I was so
Mhm.
interested, I ended up writing my master's thesis on both of them. And I was able to go to different collections, including FIT, where I work now, and the Museum of the City of New York, and actually see her garments. And they were so beautiful. They were so beautifully made. I majored in apparel design in undergrad, and so I
Mhm.
knew a little bit about sewing, certainly not on the level of Ann Lowe or Couturiers like that, but I knew enough to really recognize that this was really extraordinary work
Mhm.
and that she was, creating fashion that was elevated, that was high end, and it was coming out of the US. And we don't think about that, especially in the 50s and 60s, it's all about Paris. And so I was really fascinated by her as a maker. And her designs were so beautiful and so in touch with what was happening in fashion in the 1950s and early 60s. So I dug more and more into kind of her material culture in grad school. And then through that research, I met a woman named Margaret Powell, who is really the scholar. She unfortunately passed away very much too young in the last few years. But she was really the scholar who put together Ann Lowe's biography. So I looked at her material culture, but she really pieced together kind of the facts of her life, which is, they're amazing because she was this woman who was born at the end of the 19th century in the Jim Crow South. And she just was able to take these skills that her grandmother, who had been enslaved, passed down to her mother, passed down to her, take these skills of Black women and use it to transform her life in kind of extraordinary ways. And so I was really captivated by that story.
So is that's kind of like a segue into my next question. Is that one of the things that you really were affected by when you researched her story? And is there anything else that when you learned about her, it just affected you maybe on a deeper emotional level that you might not have thought would have affected you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the thing that's really kind of what captivates me about Ann Lowe is that her mother and her grandmother instilled in her these skills and she
Mhm.
used them to she took those skills and exploded them into this career. Her mother and grandmother were dressmakers, and
Mhm.
by the end of her career, she was a fashion designer.
Mhm.
And that was a new concept that was being developed in America over the course of her career. And she really made a space for herself with that.
Mhm.
She moved from Alabama to Florida, from Florida to New York. These are extraordinary kind of moves for a woman, even today, but in the early 20th century. And so I was really taken by the way that she could use her professional skills to change her life.
Now, this is kind of a bonus question. Do you think, especially with her and Elizabeth Keckley as well, was there something about just their air, maybe in the way they carried themselves and the way that they kind of learned about that social world of the white upper class that allowed them to succeed more so than maybe even some other Black designers in their era? Was it just, I want to say that kind of like the je ne sais quoi that they had rather than some of their other peers?
I think that I think it was that was absolutely a skill that they had. I think that both of them, from what I've read, seem to be elegant, lovely
Yeah,
people. But I
yeah.
also think that interacting with elite white women, especially as a Black woman, is a skill that is also something they learned from their mothers and their grandmothers. To be able to navigate those relationships in just the right way to assert yourself as a professional, as a creative, but
Mhm.
still, give people the deference that they think they deserve. I think that was a very fine line. And so I think there were certainly things about both of their personalities that drew people to them. But I also
Mhm.
think that those social graces were a skill that they learned.
Okay. I said, Marie, let me ask Elizabeth this because it was just kind of like one of those burning questions that I had, and wanted to get your opinion on that. And especially with you curating this exhibit, how do you feel like you want to tell that story visually, especially with the mannequin choices, adding accessories or not, the information cards? And the reason why I asked this, because there was a pretty famous story that Andre Leon Talley used to talk about with him, and um, when he was working at the Met, and when he was there volunteering, he used to always say, you know what, Miss Vreeland, Miss Diana Vreeland, when he was assisting her, when she would tell him about an exhibit that he needed to work on, she would talk about the story. She
Mhm.
would tell the story. She wouldn't just tell him, oh, just put this on a mannequin and you're done. No, she would say, no, Cleopatra needs to be walking, at night and smelling the perfume and all this stuff. And just visually for you, and especially what you've learned, how do you want to tell that story for visitors who come in and see the garments?
So for me in this exhibition, this is the largest exhibition that on Ann Lowe, and only the second that I am aware of that concentrated completely on her. The Black Fashion Museum did an exhibition on her in the 80s. I really want to draw attention to the exquisite material culture. I want people where the dress forms that we're using they're actually being specially created through 3D printing with the University of
Wow.
Delaware, but they look like dress forms, like in a dressmaker shop.
Mhm.
Because I wanted all these details to really go back to the fact that she was a couturier. Couture is not something we associate with American designers. And of course,
Mhm.
this was running parallel to the rise of ready to wear, which is an amazing and unique thing about American fashion. But I really want to draw attention to the fact that this handcraft, this exquisite workmanship, artisanship was happening in the United States, and that she was a master of it.
Mhm.
So I want to draw. So we don't have a lot of the pieces won't be kind of accessorized to highlight the style of the wearer, but really kind of focused in so you look at the details of the clothing. And so even though we are using the exhibition text to tell her story, I do try in each one draw the viewer to look at the dress in front of them and look at the embroidery or the floral work, or imagine all the layers that are creating that silhouette in front of you, because she really was like an engineer kind of building
Mhm.
these dresses from the inside out. So this particular exhibition is really focused on the objects, the material culture. There's so many different ways to approach every subject, but that's kind of my focus for here.
And with that being said, if there is someone coming for the first time to the museum who may not even be aware of her and her story, or even fashion in general, what would you like for them to learn after they walk away from seeing this exhibition?
I mean, I want them to learn that Ann Lowe is an exemplary American fashion designer, and that, compared to the French, I don't think Americans are as great as remembering their fashion designers in history,
Mhm.
whether they are Black or white or male or female. But as a
Mhm.
Black woman, that she has an extraordinary life because of the challenges, because of her race and her gender. But the story is that she was extremely important into contributing to the look of American fashion. The things that she made for elite women were photographed, they were circulated, they were seen, and they helped shape fashion culture in this country and internationally. But I really want people to walk away with the idea that Ann Lowe was an important fashion designer who helped create the fashion that we all kind of know and exist in today.
Mhm. Just thank you for that, because I remember the first time I found out about her, it was just like, especially as a woman of color, it saddened me, but then I was also joyful at the same time to see this woman who was able to navigate this world where a lot of us were not welcome. And she was celebrated, and just knowing that her story is now being told, just to me, she was also visually captivating. The way she wore her hat, those bold glasses, to me, that was something that, was very iconic as well.
Mhm.
So, but yeah, now pivoting to your story, I wanted to talk about your role, and for you, why is it important for you, especially as a woman of color, to see more people of color into this career field, this world that you are in? How important is that for more people to be entering into fashion conservation, fashion journalism? For me, sometimes I don't see that. I'll look at different documentaries. For example, there's a great documentary on the British Museum,
Mhm,
and they show all of the curators, the fashion wardrobe, conservationists, but I don't see women who look like me. So
mhm.
how important is that for you to see more of us coming into this field?
I mean, I think that if we want to create a more equitable world, if we want to create change, then we have to have people who have a vision of what the future could look like. And
Mm,
I'm not saying that those are always people of color or women, but I
yeah.
think that certainly helps. And I
Mhm.
think that if from just a very kind of practical side, if institutions want to do better, they need those perspectives. But from a personal level, like I want to see subjects that interest me. You know,
Mhm.
when I see movies, if there are no women, if there are no people of color, it's hard for me to engage. It's hard for me to be interested in it. And so
Mhm.
as a person who is producing scholarship for the public, I want to produce something that interests me in the hope that other people, not just people who look like me, but everyone can see, like, you know, this is an interesting topic. This is something that is worthy of study, that is worthy of preserving, because these are all pieces in, you know, in museum collections.
Mhm.
And so I certainly want to reach out to people who look like me and people who don't necessarily look like what's represented in the mainstream, and draw their attention and let them know like they were a part of history
Mhm.
as much as anyone else. But I
Mhm.
also want to kind of normalize this kind of fashion content and think about, like, you
Yeah.
know, Black people have always been here, women have always been here.
Yes.
People of color have always been here. So let's tell those stories so that we know that this was normal. It was normal then. And you know, it's normal now, and it needs to be even more inclusive now.
Mhm. Now, for a person who is interested in your career field, what type of steps, what type of practical advice would you give them? And as far as their next steps, what would you tell them?
I think that if you wanted to move into like kind of the museum field, I think it's important to kind of engage in kind of higher education that helps set you up for that. I went
Okay.
to graduate school. I don't think that's necessary, but if you know you're approaching your undergraduate education, it might be great to think about what kind of pipelines, what kind of professors are doing what you want to be doing in the future, and
Mhm.
kind of tapping into those networks as early as you can. You
Mhm.
can intern at museums. I think museum work is sometimes, it's definitely not as exciting as sometimes it makes it seem on TV or something. So get an internship, figure out, like, you know, you might think you want to be a curator, but maybe you want to be a conservator, or maybe you want to be a registrar. So like spend some time in those spaces and see what other jobs are kind of adjacent to what you think you might want to do. So you can get an idea of, you know, how you want your future to pan out, how you want your day to day to look like. So I would just, you know, at
Mhm.
the Museum of FIT, we work with students, we field questions from the public, like reach out to people, ask
Okay.
questions. They're very, I don't know of anyone in my field who would just, you know, ignore an email about someone interested. You know, we want to help each other, we want to build networks. So yeah, be curious and ask questions. Never be afraid to ask questions.
Now, with your role, what has been the best career advice that you have received?
You know, I was thinking about this when I was reading the questions, and I've had a lot of, you know, career advice from people I've worked with. From our fabulous director, Dr. Valerie
Mhm.
Steele. She always tells us, um, you know, an exhibition is not an essay on the wall. You have
Wow.
to tell a clear story. It has to be about the objects, and you can't overwhelm your viewer. And that can be so frustrating because there's so many interesting bits of
I
information
understand.
we want to convey, but you really have to pick and choose, because I think we've all been to exhibitions where we're like, oh, this is so much information, I can't take it in anymore. So I try really hard. I think that's probably the best piece of advice. I try really hard to tell a clear and direct story that isn't too overwhelming, so that people do kind of digest it and able to walk away with, you know, even if it's just a couple of little tidbits. I think that not overwhelming the audience is a good goal.
Okay, no, I totally get that. I just feel like, especially as another lover of history, I feel like if this is the only chance or the only time somebody might come to the exhibition, it's like we gotta get everything into them, we have
Mhm.
to share everything. So it's kind of like that less is more kind of,
It's very,
stating.
very difficult.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally understand. And another question for you is, how have you been able to overcome the fear of failure or even comparison in your role?
In a certain way, kind of studying my specialty is the intersection of African-American culture and fashion.
Mhm.
And I especially love kind of the late 19th century, early 20th century. And when I was coming through grad school, there weren't a lot of other people studying that. And so I was really able to kind of distinguish myself because there were so few people working on this topic. I
Mhm.
think that's less true now. So I think that's great.
Wow. Yeah.
But I do think it's important if you want to kind of contribute to scholarship or if you want to be a curator, it's great to find what is missing. Like there's fashion scholarship is a very new field compared to say like literature or
Mhm.
even history, and there's so many unexplored topics. So instead of maybe writing another paper about Chanel or about Christian Dior, like maybe find something that hasn't been covered. And then I
Mhm.
think that you get so excited and there's so much information out there. We definitely have not reached a level of saturation. So I was able to kind of sidestep that competition naturally just because of what I happened to choose. But I do think it's smart to think about how you want to position yourself so that you're not necessarily covering something that is already being really well covered by a lot of scholars.
Okay. Okay. And just for our final question, I kind of thought this would be something pretty fun. If you had that dream exhibition where you're head curator, what would that be about, and where would that dream location be where you would hold it?
I'm not quite sure about the location. I
Mhm.
really love our galleries, the museum at FIT, but there's some beautiful galleries out there. I think that I would do a fashion exhibition at a museum that is not a fashion museum, maybe
Mm,
just a history museum or, someplace where fashion is unexpected, but really takes that audience, shows that audience that they can learn about history through fashion and really expose fashion to people who love museums and love historical artifacts, but aren't necessarily thinking that fashion is giving them what they need.
yeah.
But the topic I'd love to explore is I want to do more about early Black dressmakers. I've done some work on it in the past. I've written about it, but like actually finding those pieces of material culture and putting them in a room together and saying like, look at what like Black women in America have been making for hundreds of years. I think
Wow.
that would be an exhibition that I would love to have.
Wow. I think that would just be amazing. Amazing. Um, Again, there's so many people, especially like me, and who are of your same vein of thought that this is art, and it's just marvelous to be able to read your work and understand that these women have been able to tell their stories through these garments. And it's just been a wonderful visual story to be able to see from their work. So I just thank you so much. I really do appreciate this. And I was able to look at your symposium at FIT. It was fabulous.
Thank you so
So
much.
I loved it. One thing that you mentioned was there was a point where you said that how most people recognize that Ann Lowe, if she would have been in Paris, she would have been recognized as like another Gabrielle Chanel. And that really kind of sat with me. I had to sit with that for a few minutes because of just the work that has gone just unrecognized for so long when she should have been up there with the giants in the fashion world. But I just want to thank you personally for taking the time to do this and all the hours of research that have come with this. So I just hope that this exhibition is huge. So thank you for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Really, it was so lovely speaking with you and sharing this with you. And I hope that, when we open, you can come down to Delaware, definitely let me know. And hopefully I can take you through the exhibition in person.
That would be amazing. I will definitely stay in touch. You'll be
Great.
like that's Marie's email. So all right, you have a lovely evening, and I hope to
You
speak to you
too.
soon.
Absolutely. Have a great one.
You too. Bye bye.